All right, so let me introduce the panel, because it really is a fantastic panel who can offer a lot of interesting insights and represents a lot of interesting folks. So I'm going to do it from your left to right. I think it just makes it a little easier. So on your left, Victor Yip, who is Vice President of Digital Media Distribution and Direct-to-Consumer and International at the Walt Disney Company. Welcome, Victor.
Thank you.
Next to him is Daniel Cohan. Daniel is a feature agent at ICM Partners, which, if there's anybody in this room who is not from Hollywood, ICM is one of the most powerful talent agencies in Hollywood. And welcome, Daniel. Next to Daniel is Katie Soo, who is Senior Vice President of Growth Marketing at Warner Media. Welcome. Welcome, Katie. And sitting next to me, Annie Luo, who is Senior Vice President of Business Development and Operations at Hulu. So we have Hulu, we have HBO Max, we have Disney represented. Now, just to be clear, Victor is not from the Disney Plus side. Victor is from the window before that. We'll get into that in a minute. Victor is from the direct-to-consumer TVOD part. And then Daniel is one of the people steering projects through in this mass creation of content that we have going on right now. So let's get started. Journalists, and we have a few of them, a few very fine ones here today. Journalists have been talking about streaming wars as though this is a major conflict, political or military. It sounds like a sequel to Star Wars. But in fact, one could look at it somewhat more benignly as a technology-enhanced way to give consumers what they want in the most effective and efficient way possible. So let's go to the $64 billion question. What do consumers in North America want? And to the extent you are willing to share it, what are you doing to give us what consumers want? Anybody, feel free to jump in.
I think, one of the things that is really important when you think about streaming is this idea that audiences have an expectation ingrained in them. They want to see the best content that they want discovery to be easy. And a lot of what we're focusing on is how do you elevate the right stories to the right audiences? How do you make the messaging relevant to them? The mic keeps going up and down, sorry. But I think what's really important too to think about is the discovery experience in an app. And this is not just isolated to HBO Max. I was at Hulu before. A lot of the issues you experience today is you're inundated with choice and selection, and sometimes at an audience, you want to discover something quickly and watch it, and you are not able to. And so one of the things we hope to do is, on the curation side, truly provide this concept of recommended by humans that you guys may have seen in the trades. And a lot of that is this editorial approach that will allow you to find the things to fall in love with faster and more seamlessly.
I just build off that. I can speak to what at Hulu we think our subscribers want. I think people come to Hulu because of the breadth of content, right? And you can say that's not unique to Hulu. They come for the price as well, right? They're also looking for affordable services. They want originals and exclusives, though interestingly we have discovered that wasn't really the top reason for a lot of people to sign up for us. They really just wanted price and breadth, right? If I look at the next 6 months, by April 2020, you're going to have 4 new services being launched, right? And they're all bankrolled by mega cap companies. So that's Apple, that's HBO Max, that's Disney Plus, and that's Peacock. Let's not forget. Interesting name, but let's not forget them. And all of them have a plan to be bundled essentially for free for the consumer, at least for a year. So speaking of choices, as Katie has just mentioned, I think consumers will be overwhelmed by choices, right? And there is a contradiction of the consumer as well, right? They want everything cheaply, and they want everything also personalized and somehow sort of just for them. So to solve for those somewhat contradictory needs, I think it's a bit of a challenge for all of us. But at the end of the day, it's great news for the consumer, a ton of content, a lot of them for free, and potentially delivered at a personalized experience powered by AI and enhanced by human curation, right? So the consumer wins.
So speaking of the breadth of content that's going to be out in the market so HBO Max is launching next year, summer of next year, right? But I think more than anything, consumers want clarity of content, right? Where are they going to find what they want to watch? And that's something that Disney has really gravitated towards as far as our strategy, in terms of the brand pillars, that if you go to disneyplus.com, it's very clear that our strategy is to focus on the brands that consumers know and they recognize. So that's Disney, Marvel, Star Wars, Nat Geo, right? And Pixar. So we believe that as long as people have that history and the legacy with the content of those brands, that they get more clarity and they can go to our platform and really understand and watch what they love, right? And so hopefully that gives what consumers want in terms of clarity and again, gravity towards the things that they love from before.
So Daniel, quick follow-up. 3 of our speakers are from platforms that are providing the content directly to end users, but you're one of the people who's involved in the creation of this content, and you have to guess in advance what consumers are going to want a year or 2 down the road. What do you see consumers want?
I think that the most exciting development that we've seen over the past few years, it's the proliferation of original content and just the creation of something for everyone. And in some ways, you've got the throwing the spaghetti against the wall and seeing what sticks. But I think with both human recommendations and algorithm-based, Netflix has their Van Damme technology, which apparently designs what your own homepage will look like, and I think versions of those exist with each of the streaming services. So from the salesperson side of the fence, we are charged with having something for everyone and identifying new voices and underrepresented voices and playing a bit of mix and match. So for us, the sky's the limit.
So we spoke about how much content is being created. If it's spaghetti thrown against the wall, it's a lot of pasta. We understand, we're told Netflix is spending $13 billion this year and maybe $15 billion next year. Apple is supposed to be spending $2 billion this year, and this is a $1.1 trillion company. So it's not like they got to worry if they're going to spend $3 or $4 or $5 billion. Each of your companies is spending so much money on content. And there's going to be a lot of it. There's more content out there than ever before. Does that allow a greater diversity of voices to be heard? And if the answer to that is yes, how do you connect that diversity of voices with the consumers who may be interested in hearing them, or maybe who don't even know about them and need to be sort of connected to them? How do you enable that diversity to be meaningful more than in a production sense, but in an actual connection to consumers? Anyone
happy to take a stab at it. I know you probably have a lot to say as well. So Hulu's mission is to captivate and connect people with powerful stories. So to answer your question, I think I'm going to share kind of a personal story. My daughter, we just moved from New York to LA 3 months ago, so my daughter is trying to make friends at school. So she met this new friend who has 2 dads, right? So she came home and she asked me a lot of questions that only a 7-year-old could ask, and I'm not going to repeat here. But they were interesting questions, right? Made you think, like, how do I talk to her about this, right? I have gay friends, but we've never had gay friends who had kids at her age, right? So around the same time, Hulu had commissioned an original. It's an animated series called The Bravest Knight. It was adapted from a book. Sorry about the Hulu plugging here, but I'm passionate about this story.
That's okay.
The Bravest Knight is about 2 dads, one sort of pumpkin farmer turned knight and a prince. And they have an adopted daughter called Nia who was training to be a knight, right? It's a beautiful story, beautifully animated. I encourage you to all watch and sign up for Hulu. But the punchline of the story is that I told Zoe, my daughter, to watch the show. At home, we only watch Hulu because when your mom works for Hulu, you don't have any choices. Sorry for her. So she watches, right? And she loves the show. And then she said, you know what? I'm going to tell Pilar about this. I'm going to ask her to watch it too. So for me, that was, I wouldn't say it's an aha moment, but it was a proud moment, right? Because when I do media strategy at Hulu, when you do Excel and charts and pie charts and things like that, you don't really kind of know what is the purpose of what I do and the mission of Hulu, right? So that did connect for me at that moment that, yes, these types of stories, may not have gotten produced if there weren't for companies like HBO Max or Disney Plus or Hulu. Not to say that broadcast networks wouldn't take the risk, but there's definitely a lot more space, a lot more investment, a lot more platform out there for these types of stories to be told. And to be able to have my daughter watch that and have her tell her friends about it, I think it was an incredible moment. So.
I think from my perspective, I would take a step back and almost provide like a personal view on it as well. I think all of us here, supporting Asia Society, obviously diverse stories and diverse content is very important to all of us. And so when you bring that sensibility to a project, regardless of whether or not it's HBO Max, Disney, or Hulu, there is a desire to make the best content for the right community and the right audiences so that there's a certain authenticity there that you cannot compromise. And so, a while ago I was on another streaming service and I was served an Asian tile. And I remember seeing it and going, God, I wonder why I just got served that piece of content, because I don't typically discover Korean content or Asian content for that matter. And, I thought, I wonder if it's my last name that triggered the search. I have no idea. But you think about all these things because you as a consumer are first and foremost, right? We do what we do because it's for the fan. But the fan comes in various types and backgrounds and cultures, and you have to know that in order to market to them and give them what they want. And so I was going through this experience and I felt kind of like, man, that's such a bummer. Like, why did I get served an Asian show that I don't watch? And then 68 episodes later, I was like, oh my God. I feel like they understand me, or they allowed me to discover a story that I would have otherwise never found on my own. But in that is a very important thread, which is, I think all of us here who touch content, who touch streaming, have such a responsibility to surface and service content for people who are looking for them, who may not have discovered it, who may not have, understood that this is a story that would be important to them. And I always reference Crazy Rich Asians. One of the things that I'm the most proud of, having been at Warner Brothers during that era, was the fact that we made a story about Asian families that was just normal. It was a love story you could relate to. It was completely outside of the norm of any sort of stereotypes. And you learned about the culture. It was a window in, but it was emotional, you connected, and it normalized it. And so when I think about streaming, regardless of what company I'm at, the most important thing is that you are curating for diverse cultures and backgrounds and thought, because that's the only thing that matters today. We have so much choice, and to Annie's point, the consumers and fans are winning. Like, they're gonna be able to pick what they want. So it's our job to ensure that the stories that we all make and want to tell in this room get serviced to them.
And you almost have to surface that special story and special content now, right? Because there is so much content and it's so competitive. So if we raise the lens a little bit to look at how the Asia streaming market is developing, right? So back in the day, iQIYI, which is dubbed the Netflix of China, et cetera, there were kind of a lot of Hollywood content, some local content, but they discovered that that was doing just okay, right? And it was important that they started looking at the local content. How do you get the local production and the local producers involved and telling those stories, right? So they started seeking high and low for those stories, and they were looking at books and old literature and tales from mythic times, develop these stories. And it was really until 2015 when they discovered, I think it was Lost Tomb or one of those stories, very culturally relevant to China, to Asia, And then the Rap of China, right, was a very locally based, culturally relevant story that their subscriptions took off, right? So in terms of the intensity of content, the diversity of content, because they're fighting so hard to win eyeballs and subscriptions and ARPU, revenue per user, that these stories have to get elevated. And you're getting all the cream of the crop servicing to the top because of the streaming wars. And I think that's a great thing.
So let me push you a little bit, all of you, on this point. You produce content. You're right. I mean, objectively, there's something like 500 to 600 television shows. Television, I put in quotes because what's television is sort of a fluid term in a way that it wasn't before. We used to know what film was and what television was, and now there's kind of features and series and limited series, but it doesn't break down the same way. But there's more of those series than ever before. There's a profusion of content, so more voices are able to be heard. So how do we connect, going back to the connection issue, how do we connect the content with the audience? Is it curation that you, the platforms, are going to do? Is it old-fashioned publicity and promotion? Does that play a role the way it used to when most of us were growing up? Is it social media? And is that social media that you drive, or are you relying on audiences, in effect, to bring each other to the set? Or is there a fourth that I'm not even mentioning? But how do you make that connection between the content you have and have paid so much for and the people who are out there?
I mean, I think there's an element of editorial for sure. I think some of the best streaming services or even products that we all use today on your phone, the curation is a key part of it. So I do think that enhances discovery and the user experience overall. And in general, I think, all of the channels for marketing still exist. There's no, it's not non-traditional versus traditional. It's just the way we as consumers and fans, even on this panel, how we experience content. So as long as we are able to find people where they are and give them something that they care about, I think that's the key.
I do think that your brand has to stand for something, right? Take Disney as an example, and this is in the public arena. Their product hasn't yet launched, Disney Plus hasn't yet launched, and there are a lot of people, let's just say a lot of people who've already signed up for it, right, in a pre-sale. So when people come to Disney Plus, they know what they can expect, right? And they will come no matter what amount of algorithm you're going to throw at them or human curation, they will just come because it's Disney Plus. It's similar to Apple, right? I'm now digress a bit. Like every time they ship a new device, there are millions of people who will buy it, and you know that you don't need a Wall Street analyst to tell you, right? 2 to 3 million people will get an Apple phone. And similar for us at Hulu, we think about what we stand for, right? What does a brand stand for apart from all this content, next day shows and originals? The brand has to stand for something for you to be able to stand out and make that connection to the viewer, in addition to all these, activation marketing channels you could always use and optimize to make that sort of engagement, to engage that consumer to win their decision moments, so to speak.
I think Annie is right in that too. As a brand, you have to be emotionally arresting. You have to connect and bring fans in. And a lot of times the show is just the entry point, right? It brings you into the experience. But over time, that's why people will gravitate towards these brands that are meaningful in their life, is because they represent something larger than just the brand itself. So there is some truth in that. I don't feel that too.
I think right now it's absolutely fascinating, just with the bundling that is occurring with the new platforms that are now coming out, with Apple just released, and they are in a unique position because they don't have the hundreds of thousands of minutes of content that is available. That might account for the lower price point, but what they are trying to make up for with the lack of the minutes would be in quality. And I think that overall trend in the marketplace, and one that we on the sales side have to be so cognizant of at all moments, in being tip of the spear, in predicting where to place content, and we're seeing with almost like a talent arms race starting to occur, and overall deals being struck between all of the major streamers and the biggest showrunner creator talent, which is fantastic. But I think that with the diversity available, we're going to see that really pushed it to a premium, and this is very interesting now with companies like Disney having the massive library. They know that if you have kids, you're going to want to have your Disney Plus, watching your Pixar, if you watch the people who've grown up with Star Wars. And I think that is exciting, but that's sort of puts companies like Amazon and Apple at a disadvantage. I mean, we're seeing with Netflix losing The Office and losing Friends. Those are their two most viewed shows. They're making up for it with additional original programming, and that's opportunity for us. And so yes, it's wonderful that the diversity of voices get to go out there. It's not so often that you create a binge-worthy show, something like Stranger Things, and I think that Netflix is so reliant upon addictive programming, and in a way that Apple is not, in a way that Hulu has not yet been, but could potentially, that will be an opportunity for them to fill. I mean, the last time we had a Game of Thrones type show, it's been 8 years, right? And what has replaced that for that market? So.
Let me ask a cut against the grain question, because everything is all flowing in the direction of curation and streaming and all of this. And sometimes, things evolve and the world has to evolve with it. Fresh Off the Boat is a show from ABC. And one of the unique advantages, if you manage to get through the gatekeepers and be on a national network, is that your show is not only going to be seen by the people who know they want to watch it, who would be curated to because of what they've watched before, but people who are just watching a network, who may discover a show, may discover a culture that they would not have otherwise seen before. Is anyone worried, Daniel, I'm focusing on you talking to the talent, is anyone worried that we're going to lose that ability in this very curated world, that we're going to lose the ability to have people who aren't in the predictive fan base able to discover new things?
I actually think what Katie was saying was really interesting about something that was thought to be directed towards you and actually did strike. There's an element of luck to it. I mean, I find myself, I go to Asia quite a bit for work, and I scratch my head and wonder how new things end up in my queue, or hey, because you like this, you should try watching this. And I'm not worried about it. I'm actually pretty robust and confident that with the additional choices, those cultural offerings will be discovered, be it from India or, just to speak of the Asian market, like iQIYI and Tencent, they're now really focused on original programming. Now, the naysayer in you may say, well, that's just because they want opportunities for brand integration and sponsorship and ads just to be seen by more eyeballs. But I actually feel like that there is a legitimate desire to deliver a quality product for not just the local market, but for international. And in the U.S., we're seeing just with the rise of Korean cinema. I mean, certainly now this year with a movie like Parasite, very well positioned to win, if not won, several Academy Awards. The rise of K-drama in a similar vein, it's now being discovered outside of just a traditional Korean population. So I'm really encouraged.
Let's widen the lens a little bit and look at streaming in the context of the larger entertainment world. And I'm going to look to Victor first, but everyone else can jump in on this. In the tech world, Windows refers to a key part of the Microsoft empire. But in the entertainment world, Windows has traditionally referred to the release pattern of content, where content went to theaters first, and then pay-per-view, TVOD as we call it today, and the like, and then some form of digital distribution, and then pay television, free television. We have these windows. Has streaming busted all of those windows? What's left of Windows? And to the extent the windows are busted, do you see streaming as being complementary or competitive to the traditional markets?
I mean, it's clear that windows are under extreme scrutiny at this point, and it makes sense, right? Because you talked about what consumers want, we talked about the content side of things, but on the business side, in an on-demand world, they want their content, we want our content now and as fast as possible. And obviously on the television side of the business, it's a little bit more diverse in terms of the windowing, but on the film side, it's still very regimented, as you mentioned, from theatrical all the way down to free TV. But Netflix still has, 25, 30, 35 of the viewing hours on movies. So it's still an important part of the business. But ultimately, there needs to be flexibility around what do the consumers want, how do we adapt, right? And I think the key that I see as we look at this is what are the key operating pillars that we got to think about as we look at windows and how do we, compress or move closer towards theatrical. And I think there's a few things. The first one is, they can't be what we call a dark zone, because right now, movies in the theaters, and then there could be a period of 2 months where you don't get it on demand yet, right? I think that has got to go, right? I mean, right now, the only people that's making money at that point is pirates, and it's very clear. The second is, I think there's got to be a mass amount of content, mass amount of studios, production companies, directors, producers that support moving the windows up, because there's participations involved, there's rights involved. It's very complicated, right? And so that's got to work. And I think third, there's got to be enough distributors that are out there that are supporting this, including theatrical exhibitors that want to support this business, because ultimately I think it's complementary, right? Because consumers, if they're getting what they want and they're becoming more avid consumers of our content, and Katie and I were just talking earlier, our competition isn't each other, right? Our competition is other forms of content. It's games, it's social media, it's time with your family, right? And so if we can make our entertainment product that much better, that much more value added, and not, when am I going to get Avengers? When am I going to get, name that title? The clearer it is where they're going to find it, when they're going to get it, the better value proposition the product is going to be. So I think that's what ultimately is going to drive, the flexibility, if there is any, around Windows.
So we have, my mind goes to an old ad of it was a woman on top of the Transamerica Tower, and King Kong is up there grabbing at her and smashing stuff, and she says at the end, "Who's going to pay for all this, you big monkey?" And it was a great ad, but all this stuff has to be paid for, right? None of this is a charitable endeavor. And the two big models, though there's variations on the theme, are the transactional model, and that's not just the TVOD that Victor's involved in. I mean, essentially going to a movie theater is a transactional model. You pay $10, $15, whatever it is, to see that movie. So there's the transactional model, paying for a piece of content. And then the second model, which is a subscription model, where you don't pay for a piece of content, you pay for the right to subscribe to one of these services. There's also, I should have said, a third model, which is advertising supported, which is historically television. Do any of you see these as, do you see these as all complementary, that they'll all continue to exist and support some of the content? Or do you see one or two of these forms of who's going to pay for all this coming to the fore?
Not in its current form. It's not sustainable. I mean, if you're looking at just broadcast television, and it's startling how the viewership numbers have been halved just in a matter of under 5 years. And I share a very similar perspective, and I do feel with all the streamers, they are complementary. And if you look at even like last year's box office in North America, it was roughly $12 billion, despite the fact that Netflix on its own released somewhere in the neighborhood of 90 original movies. So I am encouraged, and I think with that choice just comes the adaptive viewing patterns, and sure, having lower cost content available for families, but that also in turn requires theaters and exhibitors to really look at their own business models, and within the traditional 90-day viewing window, that will and is very likely changing. I think it's certainly been in the news cycle now with a movie like The Irishman, which is $150 million plus Martin Scorsese film, and having a Netflix imposed, they got in an arm wrestling match with exhibitors wanting to show the film exclusively for more than 45 days, and Netflix drew their line in the sand, and it ended up being a much shorter window. And I think, though, pointing to a movie like Roma last year, which won 3 Oscars and was exclusively in theaters for, I think, 3 weeks. There's opportunity there. It's not going to be for everything. And just as when I'm selling to the various streamers, we are now hearing for the first time whether something may or may not be destined for theatrical. And just in the last week and a half, in setting something up with the House of Mouse, something that would, in my mind, be a no-brainer theatrical. The studio wants the ability to dictate whether or not it will end up being with Disney+. And sure, just in the deal-making itself, things like streaming buyouts and the lack of back end and no box office to point to, those are all things that need to be calibrated. But in terms of opportunity to hit on, this is what I'm saying, the diversity of voices, having the opportunity to sell more into the system, just the numbers change a bit, and you just need to be smart about your deal making.
So obviously I can't speak to the economics of theatrics, but back to sort of the economics or business models of the streaming world. I mean, to your point, there are 3 business models, right? Some of us play in both, right? And I believe HBO Max right now is SVOD, but potentially AVOD as well. Hulu is both subscription, meaning SVOD, but also we have an ad-supported business model, which does give us a little bit more flexibility, right? And a bit of room in that economic world. It's an interesting question when you said, like, who is going to pay for this? I wonder that myself every day, you know. People talk about peak TV, but I feel like, you know, it just keeps peaking, and it's going to be like Mount Everest TV one day, you know, because content costs keep going up, and you are not only charging consumer more, you're actually making it free, right, in all kinds of bundles. So the economics are an interesting question to talk about and discuss, and I don't think any of us here would reveal our, you know, business secrets as to how we make the math work. But ultimately, like you are thinking about this in the broader context of pay TV, right? So yes, streaming is sort of all the rage, but ultimately we are looking at cord cutting as well, right? So you will have 20 million subscribers essentially cutting their cable TV, and those people will come into the streaming world. So it's not a zero-sum game over here that the streaming companies are playing, right? And we are swimming with the tide rather than against the tide, if you will. And between subscription and ad-supported models, I believe that the economics will get better, right? And hopefully peak TV will normalize and stop peaking for a while. And we'll figure it out. But I thought it was a really interesting question that I haven't talked about at panels recently. So, yeah.
Well, there's a lot of us out there who are thinking about it,
Right.
Because at the end of the day, when you look at the expense that all of you are going to, well, one of you is the immediate beneficiary of it, or the clients are the immediate beneficiary of it, but everyone is spending so much, and so much great content is being produced, but at the end of the day, this is not like the Medicis, you know, commissioning great art in Italy, you know, so there'll be more great art, right? At the end, it has to have a commercial purpose, and it's going to be fascinating in the coming years to see how we, the consumers, pay for this largesse of content by which model works. Let's talk a little bit about, I don't want to sound like a history teacher saying compare and contrast, you know, be brief, give specifics, but is the Asian, for those of you who are in the Asian market, is the Asian streaming market evolving similarly to the U.S., or do you see a difference between how North America is evolving and how Asia is evolving?
I'll take a stab at that. We talked a little bit about the local content, right, and how Aichi has developed that way. I see it going even further down that path of being local, and this is not just China. I mean, China in particular, given how popular local content has been, how much success Tencent, iQIYI, and others have had with local content, I think it's going to continue investment down that path. But obviously, everybody knows about the trade war that's sort of that's going on right now. That's impacted content import in China as well. So that's going to slow down foreign content getting to China. But if you think about, again, the rest of Asia, India, for example, Bollywood is hugely popular. And they kind of mix that business up. So there's Hotstar, right, the subscription business out there. They mix it with sport. You get cricket as part of your subscription, which is huge. So I think a lot of diversity outside of just scripted content and non-scripted, but sports is going to be part of how Asia will develop. And I think we're going back to the Windows conversation, the difference. I mean, a lot of parts of Asia, and this impacts our business, of course, are already going pretty early in their windows, right? So Korea was a market that I was involved with for a long time, where they are launching transactional video on demand concurrently with theatrical. And that's Hollywood content, right? And it was a huge business for Fox. I was at Fox previously. And for other studios that participated in that as well. But for even the local content in India and Korea, they're releasing television series and movies, feature films, day and date with theatrical. That's pretty bold, but it's a big business. And I think, is that a sign for how things are going to happen in North America? No idea, right? But again, because participations, rights, royalties, all those things are different, in parts of the Western world. But I think if there's any indication about where opportunity is with local content, with Window, I think that Asia has some very interesting data points.
We're running close to our time, but I want to ask this question for whoever is willing to weigh in on it. We often hear about organizations, particularly in a technology-driven world and in a globalized world, about this organization or that company is so nimble. Nimble is one of the great compliments that people give to organizations. And yet, the production of this amount of content and the curation and distribution of it requires enormous financial resources. And the people getting into or already in the streaming business are big companies with the level of resources necessary to make good on their commitment to consumers. The question is, when you've got that much expenditure in very big companies, how do you stay nimble? How do you stay flexible? What can you do in a rapidly changing world to position yourself for success or be ready to make a change? Daniel, you look like you have a thought on this.
Oh,
you're in the nimble category because you're at an agency that can be a little more nimble than a giant.
Sure. But I think that just speaking from the talent side of things, there is quite a bit of flexibility that the streamers offer that traditional film, for example, does not, which is why we're seeing A-level talent at the actor level on down sprinting to the streamers, because both for if you're Michael Bay and you want to make a $150+ million tentpole movie like he's done with Six Underground coming out in December, like that is not maybe a film that was as obvious for a bigger studio, and they were able to put together a big cast with Ryan Reynolds and others. And I think on the television side, we're now seeing A-level actors wanting to be part of limiteds and minis, and they're not playing by the same rules of broadcast television. They're able to 5 episodes, 3 episodes, 8 episodes, 12. The seasons don't necessarily have to come back within a year. So that level of flexibility offered by the streamers is overwhelmingly enticing, I think. So for us, seeing those opportunities and dealing with movie stars who had no interest in television 5 years ago, compare that to where it is now, it's astonishing.
Yeah. So I take a stab, and then you guys can chime in too. So I think, to your question about nimble, I think I might sort of come back to say, like, we need to stay focused, right? And I think that's where having a clear mission and vision, right, know your customer promise is very important. Especially, is probably more important when you can be easily distracted, right, by competition or by new product features or new innovations, and what do we do with 5G? All of those questions. So I think about this as sort of an opportunity for us to really be able to articulate what does Hulu's customer promise is, what is our vision and strategy, and really stay focused and follow through.
It's interesting because it may offer something that Hollywood hasn't seen before. I mean, I can remember when there were 2 volcano movies coming out from studios at the same time. You know, you get the sense that somebody, I won't name studios, somebody at Studio A said, Studio B has a volcano movie. We have to have a volcano movie too. And literally 2 volcano movies came out within like 3 months of each other. And people said, well, they're like sheep. They're all, if they think an idea is good, everybody's going to follow it. But what I'm hearing from some of the folks here today is you want to go in a different direction and be brand conscious and stand for something and not necessarily do what everybody else is doing.
You know, the only thing I'll add to this, and I've been in the subscription-based business for a while now, and the one thing that is consistent is change. We live in an ever-evolving technology landscape. Competitors will emerge all the time. Your audiences are changing, behaviors are changing. You were just saying, like, consumption patterns are changing. And so to stay focused on the goal to deliver the best-in-class experience, programming, product to your fans is the priority. And it's regardless of what category or industry you're in. You know, we all happen to be in entertainment and we're focusing on streaming services. But regardless of what that is, that may evolve very quickly. The way people experience streaming and video content may evolve. And I think that's what's exciting about what we do.
Yeah.
You know, I agree, it opens up so much opportunity and flexibility. But as long as we stay focused that the core is to elevate incredible, heartwarming stories to the right people, elevate diversity, elevate culture, and you bring that to the forefront of what it is that we do, the brand will follow. The pieces that matter to all of us here follow. And as long as we're all able to deliver against that, I think we will have an opportunity to redefine the marketplace.
That's a great closing note. We've had the opportunity today to hear from key players in the companies and organizations that are shaping the content that is going to be produced and delivered to all of us. I think it's been very insightful, and I'd like to express my appreciation to this terrific panel. Please join me.